Hare Krishna. Welcome everyone back again to our conversation on the importance of Srila Prabhupada's books. This is a project by the ISKCON Ministry of Education, and my name is Krishna Prem Rupa Das from ISKCON Zurich. And today we're very honored to have with us His Holiness Candramauli Maharaj. Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare
Krishna, thank you for being with us. His Holiness Candramauli Maharaj was born originally in New Jersey, in America, and then started to practice Krishna consciousness. I believe you were about 24 years old when you came in contact. Mm-hmm. Is that right? Yeah. And then started practicing in New York, and then also living at the New Brindavan farm community. And Maharaj received initiation from Srila Prabhupada in 1973. And later on in 1986, Maharaj accepted the renounced order of life, became a sannyasi, and since then is preaching, sharing Krishna consciousness, mainly in Europe, in America, in India, also serving as a spiritual master. And also, since many years, I think almost 40 years now, is engaged in preaching in prison, like sharing Krishna consciousness to prisoners, and in this way also serves as the leader of the ISKCON prison ministry. So, and of course, Maharaj is also very well known for his love for kirtan and his ecstatic dancing. So, thank you so much, Maharaj, for being with us today. And we'd like to speak about the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. So, maybe the first question, if you could tell us, what was your first encounter with Srila Prabhupada's books? Which book was it? And maybe do you remember something specific about that first contact with Prabhupada in the form of his books?
I clearly remember the book, and I had read it many times when I first received it. I was back in New York when I first was going to the temple in New York in 1972. And then actually, even before that, in Denver, Colorado, when I first met the devotees there in the end of 1972. But the first book that I can clearly remember reading, and that was in New York, was Sri Upanishads, that small little paperback book that Prabhupada had published. There was many versions of the same book, but I remember the compact one, the small one, the pocket size. I can't recall how I actually came across the book, but it became a fascination for me. I think I picked up on that one, and I read it at least 3 or 4 times continuously. I found it really philosophically challenging. So it was something that I developed an interest in. So I kept reading it over and over again, trying to understand. And Prabhupada's purport helped to make the verses clear, but the verses were very, very hard to understand. At least at that time when I was.
That's interesting. You actually picked up from the very beginning the idea that such books should be read again and again. Because sometimes devotees say, okay, I've read this book, that's it. But actually, of course, scriptures are meant to be read again and again. So it seems you pick up on that from the very beginning.
Now as we're talking, now I actually recall the first periodical I first came across. And that was back in 1970 when I had attended an anti-war rally against the Vietnam War in Washington, D.C. And the devotees were there, and they were distributing books and also pamphlets. And I received a small pamphlet with 2 articles. One was Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and Who is Crazy? Prabhupada had written this article, Who is Crazy, based on the criticism that were coming. The people were saying, well, you people are crazy. Simply by seeing us, they could come to that conclusion. And Prabhupada would responded in the article in a very gentlemanly way by saying, you say we are crazy, and we say you are crazy, so let's decide. And then Prabhupada explains, one who knows the difference between the body and the soul is sane, and one who doesn't is crazy. But one who thinks I am this body, that's this form of insanity. So that was the first periodical. You might say it wasn't actually a book, it was a pamphlet. That
But it
was
was
the first, yeah.
first contact with Prabhupada's writing in that sense.
Yeah, and devotees at that time too.
So now, just in general, like, why do you feel it is important to read on a regular basis Srila Prabhupada's books? What would you say?
Well, to know the philosophy, to be able to understand the philosophy, to be able to speak the philosophy, to fulfill Srila Prabhupada's desire, as he emphasized many times, that devotees, they distribute my books, but they don't read. And he said, I have written these books for the devotees. He made that clear. He wrote it for us. And of course, one of our services to Prabhupada is to distribute it, but he emphasized that the devotees need to read it and understand it. So to fulfill Prabhupada's desire and to fulfill the mission that he gave us in terms of distributing this knowledge in the form of speaking to others. And Prabhupada said, whatever I have said, whatever is important, whatever I've said, they're in my books.
Like, in order to actually speak, we also have to first hear or read. So
Right.
to preach, we want to share these books with others. We also need to understand what's in there.
Yeah. And if we have a tendency to read, which most individuals do, if we don't read spiritual philosophy, we'll read something else. Other than that, will take us away from Krishna consciousness.
It's also, I mean, Prabhupada personally made that statement that if you actually read my books, you actually associate with me. Like,
right.
He's never leaving us. I don't know, would you like to share some personal experience on that? Do you have some realization you like to share? How you personally experience Prabhupada in his books by reading them?
I have one unique experience, which was a one-time experience, and was based on a statement Srila Prabhupada made to all of us devotees prior to his departure. Not very much before his departure. He said that if you want to associate with me, I'm in my books. Because the question came to Prabhupada, how can we associate with you? And Prabhupada said, I'm in my books. You read my books. In that way, you can have my associate. You will have my association. And so I remember when I was staying in Chicago, I had my room there and I was reading Srimad Bhagavatam. I think it was one late morning. And I was reading for a long time. It must have been, maybe 2 hours of reading, continuous. And at one point during the reading, something changed significant. And I was no longer reading the words. I was hearing Srila Prabhupada speak the words from the pages. It was like listening to a recording of Prabhupada's voice, speaking the words as I was reading it. I was kind of like a little bit overwhelmed, but at the same time happy, and I was listening, and reading at the same time. Because as I was reading, I was hearing. And then at one point, it stopped. And then I understood, oh, yes. Prabhupada said, I'm in my books.
Well,
So I think he wanted to make a point. So I had that experience. It never happened again. It happened only one time. I think that the message was clear, and that's what Prabhupada wanted to do. Yeah, I'm in my books. But I thought at the same time, the fact that I was reading for such a long time really caused me to become absorbed. And at that point, when I said I was really absorbed in the reading, the voice started to, appear. So that was a nice experience.
Yeah, that's a very profound experience you share with us. Thank you, Maharaj. Also, this week is actually called Shravan Week. Some devotees may wonder why Shravan, but actually reading is hearing. Right?
Yeah.
Reading is is also a form of hearing. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
We also hear that statement that we need to learn to see the world through the eyes of scripture, this Shastra Chakshu. By reading again and again, more and more we will be able to see the world through the eyes of Shastra. Do you have some example, or could you explain us how this works, or maybe some personal experience?
Yeah. There's many examples we can use. The most prominent thing is that we have a tendency to see an individual, but then to see through the eyes of scripture means to see that individual as being connected to Krishna, as being part and parcel of Krishna, being a spiritual being with a body and not simply seeing a body or experiencing that relationship based on the external appearance. This Shastra Chakshus is applied in many ways. Another way that I can remember is when Prabhupada wanted to demonstrate the way we can see Krishna. And he was speaking, I can't remember the exact setting, but he was talking to the devotees. And at one point he said that he held up his glasses in the air and he asked the devotees, when you see my glasses, what do you think? And they say, well, we think, Prabhupada, that's your glasses. He said, yes. He said, in the same way, we see everything in relationship to Krishna. That everything that we experience everywhere is actually the energy of Krishna. So he said, seeing that way, then you can see Krishna through the energy, through his energy. We have a tendency, at least from the material point of view, that when we see something, we designate it according to what the item is. That is not incorrect, but it's also limited. It's limited in the sense that we sometimes, if we don't understand what is behind that object, what is the purpose of the object, then the enjoying spirit or the desire to use it, what we say, separate from what is intended to be, and that is, as Prabhupada said so many times, everything is meant to be used in the service of the Lord, because everything belongs to the Lord and everything was created by the Lord. So all of these things are part of the Shastra Chakshus, ways to see with knowledge. That's what it actually means. And not simply to see with, as Prabhupada says, these two little balls.
So Shastra help us to actually remind us of our true spiritual nature and see things in a different perspective. Yeah.
And Shastra is full of that, showing us what is reality beyond what we perceive with our senses.
That's why it's also said actually we can see through the ears, not through the eyes. Like by hearing and reading, we get a deeper understanding.
Yeah. Continual hearing causes that vision to actually develop.
So when we contemplate about these points, it becomes very obvious that it's so important to read daily. At this year's ILS, ISKCON Leadership Sangha, we were also having different presentation centered around the topic of the future of ISKCON. And that's why also the question came up, in what way would ISKCON be different if actually all the members would read every day Srila Prabhupada's books?
Well, I can answer that question in so many ways. We'd have more people preaching. That
more people preaching, you say?
Yeah, more people, more devotees giving classes. There's somewhat of a lack in that area where classes are somewhat given by persons who are, what we say, senior or seen in that way. But anybody and everybody should be able to give a class. And that was also Srila Prabhupada's instructions to us. Read my books and speak also. So, as Prabhupada also said, preacher means reader. For one who wants to preach, then you should read more and more. And because then it kind of not only does it give you the information or the knowledge, but it actually inspires you to speak as you take in more and more of the philosophy. There's an inspiration that comes. It's more like the progression of our whole philosophy, that from Shravanam comes Kirtanam, and from Kirtanam comes Smarnam. So Smarnam is actually our goal, but Smarnam is reached through continual Shravanam and Kirtanam, and reflecting on what we hear also.
So if devotees would read more often, they may also become more comfortable to actually share and to speak about what they heard.
And I think we'd have a lot less counseling programs. What I mean by that is, and this is a principle of importance, is that when you know the philosophy, then when Maya attacks, you have the equipment to deal with Maya through the understanding of the philosophy and learning how to apply what you know according to the situation you find yourself in. And a lot of times devotees get overwhelmed or confused or bewildered or discouraged because the situation seems to be something that they can't deal with. But the philosophy is the basis, or the beginning by which we can start to take apart what's happening to us and learn how to find a solution or correction.
So in other words, actually reading helps us to sharpen our intelligence, right? To discriminate better.
Yeah. Well, why is this happening the way it's happening? Well, I read in the Prabhupada's books, it says this. So just like I give you an example. It's in the 7th canto in the 15th chapter, verse number 24. It's a most, what we say, relevant verse to the particular situation we find ourselves in with this coronavirus. And Prabhupada basically says that, through animal slaughter, the reactions are pestilence and war. And he says, he also calls it an epidemic. He uses that word. So it's interesting how we can find connections to everything that's happening, either within our own life and externally in the world, through Prabhupada's books. And if they're not in the books, which most of everything is, they're in his lectures. Those two things combined include everything that we need to know and more.
And there is also the letters and the conversations as well.
Right. Yeah. Letters, conversation, and then of course personal instructions are also there.
All right, so we spoke a bit about the importance, why it is so important. Maybe we can talk a bit about how to read, or give devotees some ideas, some tips on how to improve their reading practice.
Yeah.
Maybe, Maharaj, how do you ensure enough time every day? I mean, you're also busy traveling and preaching. Do you have some personal practice of reading always at the same time, or how does your personal study look like, if I may ask?
Well, that's changed, but ever since this lockdown or this restriction on traveling has been in effect, it's easier now to organize reading time. Before, I made an attempt to find time for reading by finding gaps in my schedules between preaching and traveling. But now it's easy. Now I have a regular reading time at the same time, practically the same time every day. Yeah. That's one of the benefits of this particular situation we find ourselves in now, is that we can become more organized on a personal level.
Yeah, it seems for many devotees it's sometimes quite difficult. They face different obstacles for reading, such as lack of time, or they feel distracted, or they feel tired when they start to read. What would you advise devotees who have a hard time to maintain a strong reading practice? Are there any tips or advices you would give us?
Yeah, I actually have written down a 10-point program for how to read. Okay, first decide what you're going to read, and then decide how long you're going to read for. Make that also a time consideration. Find an area where there's free from distractions and begin your reading. Get comfortable, but not too comfortable where you get sleepy or drowsy. You may read aloud, or you may read softly. If you find yourself a little bit sleepy, reading aloud helps to overcome that. And then as you're reading, try to note certain things that are outstanding. You may also keep some means for jotting down some points. Reflect on what you're reading. Start to think about what you're reading in relationship to any experience you may have in your life. And then when the time is up, go back over and think about what you read. If you wrote some notes, go back over that. See how they apply in your life. And kind of review it so you can increase the recall of what was read. Like that. And these are some basic points that I think are helpful.
I guess for many devotees, they just need to find the inspiration and actually make the priority to really understand that this is important, and just give some time for this every day. Of course, that's why also we have this Shravan week, trying to encourage devotees to do that. I
find, and this I think is very essential in order to establish regular reading, is you have to schedule it as part of a particular part of your day. When you do that, you kind of like adhere yourself to that schedule, and whatever else may go on, you realize this is my reading time. Of course, unless there's some emergency. But schedule it where you know this time you'll have for reading. For instance, before I take breakfast, I read Bhagavatam, so like that. Or if I'm near the temple here, where I am here in Slovenia, so occasionally I give class in the morning. So that also means preparing for the class, like that. Like that. So I read other things besides Prabhupada's books, but I schedule my Srimad Bhagavatam reading every day at a certain time.
I think that's
sure.
Yeah. Like anything important, we make sure that we schedule it in our agenda, because we know we need to do it. So if you do that for the reading, that's certainly helpful.
Yeah, because sometimes you may not have the taste for reading at a particular day, but that schedule brings you to that service. And then when you start reading, you'll see that lack of taste is overcome. Sometimes you're enthusiastic to read, and sometimes you may feel a little less. But by scheduling it, you'll always be there.
Now, of course, reading is one thing. And then we also spoke a bit about that, of course, reading also meant that we start to apply what we have read. Do you have any advice for us how we can make sure that what we have studied, what we have understood, that we are able to actually put it in practice?
That's a system also. Reading should lead to understanding. Understanding should lead to application, and application eventually leads to realization. So it follows a particular sequence. So when you're reading, in order for you to apply it, you have to understand it. Therefore, as Prabhupada also emphasized, to understand means repetition in reading. Read it over and over again until it becomes more and more clear. Especially when you come across things that are very difficult to understand. Just like, for example, we have Brahma Samhita with the purports by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So there's one little incident where the devotees, when they came across that book, they had a very difficult time dealing with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's English. So they actually approached Prabhupada and asked him to write an explanation. Prabhupada said, no, you just read it over and over and over again. And he made that point a couple of times in other lectures to make that understanding becomes more and more clear through repetition.
That's an interesting point that Prabhupada refers to. Well, if you don't understand it, just read it again. And by doing that, more and more knowledge will become more clear.
And if you actually come to the point where you still feel like there's more to know, then you can ask questions to somebody who you feel can answer. But by reading it over and over again, it piques your interest in what you're reading, and they even want you to find out more.
Now, Maharaja, in the beginning, I mentioned that you have been many years sharing Krishna consciousness in prisons. I was just thinking maybe you would like to share some experiences, some incidents of inmates who came in touch with Srila Prabhupada's books. I'm sure there must be many stories how these inmates, prisoners, how their life changed by actually getting in touch with Prabhupada's books. Like our lives have been changed by Prabhupada's books. But we'd be interested to hear about some examples that you...
Yeah, well, the book can go into the jails many times where the devotees can't go for whatever reason. Sometimes they're able to go personally, but most of the time, the majority of the time, it's the book that makes the difference. And receiving a book in the mail or somehow coming across a book in the prison library, there is a whole change in their life in such a way that they start to, they're amazed, a lot of them, by what Prabhupada is saying and how he is saying it. And it really piques their interest. And this is a common thing. I think it's the most common thing in terms of what has changed people in jail to become interested in and practice Krishna consciousness. And more than anything, it's Prabhupada's books. So we also try to get books into the libraries, and then the inmates have access. And a lot of times they're just looking for something new to read, and they come across. There's one little kind of interesting story where one person was looking for a book to read, and he saw this Western book. And had a cover, some kind of American Western. So he picked it up, but the cover wasn't what the book was Prabhupada's books with a different cover on it. So now he has Shastra in front of him. At first he was a little bit unhappy, but then something piqued his interest to read, and he started reading. And then from there he contacted devotees and then became a regular reader. And then started chatting also.
Wow.
But there's one real very I guess to say is one experience that was quite outstanding, where one devotee was a counselor amongst other religious counselors in jail, and so he would hold regular sessions with some of the inmates. From the Hindu point of view, he was a Hindu counselor, so it wasn't like a Hare Krishna counselor, but he was a devotee, so he was presenting Hinduism through Krishna consciousness through Hinduism. And so he had asked the administration, the jail administration, if there's anybody who you think that might be interested in our group. And they said, oh, well, yeah, actually, we have one person. Yeah, he's an Indian, and he's sentenced to be executed in about a couple months' time. So we'll ask him to come to your group. And he did. So prior to that, in regards to his situation, he was claiming I'm innocent and blaming so many other people. I've been put into this situation. I didn't do it. And so after coming and reading, studying Bhagavad Gita, they had Bhagavad Gita courses, and asking questions. After a couple weeks, even more, or maybe a little bit more, his whole mind changed. He started to admit the fact that he was guilty. When his parents came, they saw a different person. He was more calmer, more peaceful, less vindictive, less accusing. He became practically the best student in the whole group. And then it was time for him to be executed. And so they were taking him along. But before they took him to his execution, he asked the jailers if he could have the Bhagavad Gita in his hand with him. And they said, fine. He said, I want to have it with me so in my next life I can become a devotee. And so when he's walking and they're moving him along, and the jailers later related to us that, when we're taking someone to their execution, they don't go willingly. We have to kind of drag them and push them. But this man, he was just walking and waving to the other prisoners that, nice to know you. I'm going to be a devotee of Krishna. In other words, he wasn't at all fearful. He was acting just normally. And so that was reported. And then later on, I wrote that in the form of an article that I published in my second book, which was called Forbidden Voices, which was the sequel to the first book called Holy Jail. So that was a nice experience, and that was a pretty powerful one, more than any. Because, when you're going to be, your body's going to be killed, you're constantly in fear. But he lost all his fear. At least at least externally, no one could see that he was fearful anymore.
That's amazing. That's amazing how just by reading Srila Prabhupada's books, he developed such a understanding and conviction.
Yeah, it was the Bhagavad Gita solely. That was the only book he was exposed to. Yeah. That's a nice, and there's so many stories, just like there's one inmate that I write occasionally, and he was on the verge of suicide. being brought up as a Christian, very strict Christian. Somehow or other, he found himself in a situation where he's put in jail for life. And he became, he was trying to follow Christianity in jail and couldn't do it, wasn't feeling the security he needed by reading. So he decided to leave Christianity and became degraded, got into a lot of sinful activities in jail. And at one point, he reached a point of complete frustration, and he decided that he was going to commit suicide. So just around that time, somebody had sent another inmate some books. And one was called Coming Back, Prabhupada's book on reincarnation. So that friend gave it to him, and he started to read it, and he read it. He said, as he explained to me, I read it a few times, and I found out all the answers I was looking for and couldn't find before. And then I decided, let me explore this more. So he gave up his idea, committing suicide, and now he's in jail and he's practicing, and he's got a group of inmates who are following him. He has regular meetings. So he's really, really, really like dedicated. He's been chanting 32 rounds every day,
and he's sharing Krishna consciousness with the other inmates.
Yeah. He started his own little sangha in the
That's amazing.
At first, in the first prison he was in, he didn't have that kind of facility, but later on, by Krishna's grace, he got transferred to a better facility, which allowed him more leeway. Mm. So when he used that to inspire his fellow inmates, it's good. Yeah. He's really, really serious, super serious. You can say he's a fanatical Hare Krishna. He's really like right there,
But it's interesting because these inmates, they are in a very difficult situation. And in this way, may they take up Krishna consciousness more seriously. Mm-hmm. But in some way, we are all prisoners in the material world. So if we realize that, we may also should take it up more seriously ourselves as well. Yeah.
That's one of the benefits of reading Prabhupada's books. We understand our position here. It's one of the more important benefits.
Well, thank you so much, Maharaj, for sharing that with us. I don't know whether you have some last message to all of us, something you'd like to share with us.
Yeah. Well, there have been many ways that you can approach reading Prabhupada's books or learning Prabhupada's books. Not only individual reading, but group reading with maybe a few people. This also brings nice sangha with other devotees. Come together, pick a shastra, read, discuss it, which is really inspiring. In that way, you can really find much more depth to the knowledge which has been given to us through this discussion type of environment. Mm. It'll please Prabhupada. That's another reason why we should read. He really emphasized the importance of his devotees, followers, to read his books.
If you reflect how much Prabhupada invested, how much hard work he invested into writing his book, translating.
And when you think about the times that he was doing the translations on his Bhagavatam, was the time when everyone was resting. He was up in the middle of the night doing his, reading the purports of the previous acharyas, studying their purports, and adding his own realizations according to the Western mentality as he describes. Prabhupada really sacrificed a lot to bring his books. And it was his books that he brought with him when he first came to America. He had those 3 volumes of the first canto, and he was selling those books, and people were buying. And many devotees later on explained that, after reading this, then I understood behind this very nice sadhu, there was a very deep philosophy. So, yeah, there is a certain, I don't know, I can't say mindset, but there's a certain idiosyncrasy or whatever it is, I don't know how to describe it, is that when we have time, we read. But the thing is, we always find ourselves, doing so many other things. And then if there's time, we read. But if you want to actually go deeper into this philosophy and to the practice, we need to regularly read and schedule that reading in. So that's one of the most important things, is to schedule it. Reading also helps us in our other areas. It also helps to improve the quality of our chanting also. That's almost automatic. Bhagavatam is an incarnation of Krishna personally. And that's mentioned in the 3rd chapter of the first canto of Bhagavatam, verse number 43. And that when Krishna left the planet, he left himself in the form of this Bhagavad Purana, which will give light in our dark age of Kali.
So reading is not just an intellectual exercise, but actually it's a spiritual practice to associate with the Lord directly also.
It's also a feature of, what is it? That the knowledge we gain is, as we understand from Shastra, knowledge is freedom. Just like the example I gave with that inmate who was executed, he was actually free from all his anxieties and all his whatever negativity he had in his life was lost because it was gone, destroyed by transcendental knowledge. And that's mentioned in the Gita too, like the sort of transcendental knowledge cuts through this illusion of material energy, helps you to see things clearly. And by regular reading, a taste for reading will develop. And once that taste develops, then we'll look forward to reading more and more.
It's like with chanting. Prabhupada also said that if you want to chant more, to get taste, we should just chant more. So the same applies to reading, right?
Yeah. If we apply the right principles when we approach the books, not that we just read to get it over so we can do something else, but read to understand.
All right. Thank you so much, Maharaj, for giving your valuable time to us and your valuable realizations. Please pray for us that we may develop a taste, and as you said, that we prioritize this part of our spiritual life to really go deeper and study Prabhupada's books on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. That's really what we like to do, and through the association with personalities like you, we hopefully all get inspiration to actually do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about Srila Prabhupada's books.
Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Maharaja ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.